Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author. And in this video, we are going to be talking a little bit about economy and the general use of the term to mean a system of monetary exchange, relatively speaking. And the first thing that we should start off by talking about is we could start off by talking about how systems were developed before, the backstory, if you will, but I think we should start off right now with what's going on right now. If you break it down into the simple element of exchange today, what you see is essentially an elimination of layers. Right now, simply put, base circulatory exchange is based solely and entirely off numbers of a balance sheet. That balance sheet is what many of us call a bank account. Regardless of whether it's through an app, so-called cryptocurrency, or any other type of quote-unquote official currency system, most exchange today, if not all, is done based off of numbers on a balance sheet alone. When you go and charge a credit or debit card, either or, the exchange happening is simply a transfer of numbers from one balance sheet to the next. There's a couple problems with this. With the base exchange medium being only numbers on a balance sheet, the main problem with this is, first of all, that only certain people control this. Those certain people have the capability to eliminate or add numbers to any balance sheet, essentially speaking, at will. They can just do it if they so please or whatnot, and there is virtually no consequence. Of course, this didn't just happen, right? We didn't get into this strange situation where the numbers on a balance sheet hold more value or currency for trade and exchange than anything else. There was a steady elimination of things for that to happen. To start with, most monetary systems were based on what's known as a tri-metal system. That means three metals used for very specific purposes. Copper, being black money, was used mainly for everyday exchange, buying eggs at the market, milk, chicken, whatever, right? Food, various supplies, things like that. Whatever you need, you can buy with copper. And that's where the term black market comes from. The next is your white money, or silver, which is used usually between merchants in most cases, I'd say, but there's many varieties and many differences. But either way, this is the basic understanding of a tri-metal system, is that silver is used between merchants in order to exchange large quantities of goods with each other, and the value is placed next to silver. And then you can do a whole ratio split, which is the accounting, or counting your money and counting the value of your objects or products that you have in comparison to the money value. And then gold, generally used as a means of, if you will say, wealth storage, investing, and holding on to value. Interestingly, in the United States, while we still have something called change, we have the presence of a bimetal system. We have the presence of copper in pennies, of which, of course, there's no copper in them anymore, but either way, the color is supposed to be representative of copper. But they're essentially like tokens that you would use at a casino or for a car wash or whatever, right? Those little cheap, crappy tokens. So that's what we have, is token money, as far as physical currency goes. But most stuff nowadays, of course, is done just solely based off balance sheets with your balance sheet representative card system. And then the silver is present in dimes, nickels, and quarters. Now those names, dime, nickel, and quarter, I'm not sure about nickel in relation to the material known as nickel, but a quarter would be a quarter of an ounce, being that a silver dollar was, generally speaking, I believe, understood to be an ounce. Of course, you had different weights and things here. You know, you've got the pound or the leve. So the pound sterling representative quality of silver, nowadays doesn't represent silver at all. The English pound has no silver involved whatsoever. That symbol is an L for leve, which is French for a pound. However, the US dollar symbol is an S with either one or two lines through it. And I would argue, well, I wouldn't argue maybe, but I would bet that that S stands for silver, regardless of whatever stupid explanatory cheap nonsense that you'll find on Google or in academia or any of these other guardians of truth and all that. So when you look at the Constitution, you find out that there is a bimetal system, but it does not include copper. It specifically states in the U.S. Constitution that debts only can be paid in gold or silver. That means that when you have a service rendered, then there's a debt to that person and you have to pay them in either gold or silver, and nothing else constitutionally is allowed. So one has to wonder, when exactly was the quote-unquote copper penny actually introduced into official circulation in the United States? We're not living under the constitutional republic. The U.S. Constitution is paid lip service to, but is essentially speaking a dead letter. It requires the leverage of force to ensure that it is becoming a living, a quote-unquote, well, not the way they use the term living document, but that it becomes, once again, a mechanism through which justice is rendered. Right now what we have is purely corporate. It's controlled completely monetarily by this fictitious corporate governance bank structure, right? Everything is done based off equity and all that stuff. But that's those are things I've covered in a bunch of videos. Right now we're talking purely about the economic implications about having the removal. So basically you start out with this bimetal system in the United States, trimetal system in many other places. But either way, it's generally going to be around gold, silver, and copper. And I believe gold is like called yellow money or something like that in most languages. If you look at in French, you have you've got I believe they also use the word azure or azul or blue. I mean, azul is Spanish, but azure. But you know, the word usage isn't really that important for the context of what we're talking about here. The bimetal and trimetals systems have, essentially speaking, been obliterated across the entire planet, at least for most people, I'd say. I'm sure it's still used in very select circles of individuals. Either way, the metals were removed and replaced with paper, which was supposed to be representative of that metal, and that's of course where we get the US dollar. It's a paper note which is supposed to represent silver, and that's supposed to, of course, make you more secure and all that. Of course, it doesn't do any of that stuff. So then they remove the metals, right? It's the shell game. That's what we're looking at here. This is a shell economy run by shell corporations, and of course they implement the shell game to steal anything of value. And they always do it by putting this thing in its position and then removing the thing that they put into that position, you know, like a shell covering a stone or whatever. And now they're attempting to, with this cashless society nonsense, which they will implement, pretty much. They will implement it, and in many aspects have already done so. Either way, the note itself that's supposed to be representative of this metal is then removed and everything becomes reduced to the balance sheet. So when you take a look at the old system, you had multiple layers. First, say you have a quantity of silver, as in just a regular individual, right? You're going to go deposit that quantity of silver in the bank. And then two things happen. One, they write down that you deposited it and they put it into the balance sheet, and then they provide you these paper notes representative of that silver that you deposited. So that's three things involved. You have the physical silver itself, you have the paper money, a representative of the silver, and then you have the balance sheet. Well, remove the paper money and remove the silver, and you have what we have today, which is only the balance sheet remaining. It's what they write and say is deposited, shall we say. It's whatever they say it is goes. And you can't actually do anything about it. Technically speaking, all these banks could reduce everybody's bank account to zero, and that's that. They could do it if they want. They could, and they do actually award themselves large, infinite amounts of balance sheet numbers to each other, themselves, and their nonprofit and all these other institutions. And they basically do have unlimited resources. The interesting part about it is that this looks a lot like the stuff that they would show in like Star Wars, where people do transfers based off of credit transfers alone. There's actually, technically speaking, no real exchange of anything. It's just, I have this number of credits over here, and then it magically appears in yours over here because the transfer was made via, a non-physical means, essentially. So that's the idea of what we're probably going to be living in, but of course there's a lot of problems when you reduce everything. That's not to say anything about the reduction of barter and removal of that. And then one of the more difficult things to look at here is when you try to figure out the ratio of prices today compared to in the past, and not even that distant, maybe 100, 200 years ago, it's almost impossible. And the main reason for that is because this whole corporate shell structure, with which everything's run off balance sheets, has the ability to set prices for everything based off those balance sheets and the control of that, mainly, but other mechanisms as well. So if they set the price for silver, an ounce or silver dollar, at 36 US dollars, being that they're just numbers on the balance sheet, that might not actually equate to the actual value of it in, say, 1899. And the other thing that you look at is this constant repetition of the image of people in a year like 1899 being destitute, poor, and making very little money. One of the reasons for that is that you can come along and see a advertisement or a magazine from that era saying, like, for a ranch hand, that they will be hired for $3 a day. And of course, most people today, because they don't even have the smallest amount of education, the basic, simple understanding of what I'm talking about here, with a monetary system of metals or non-metals or just general value in exchange. There's no understanding of that generally, so people will simply compare what they read to now and say that person must be dirt poor because they're making nothing. Those dollars, those $3 that person makes a day, are equivalent to silver dollars. And if you are going to make a one-for-one equivalency from the current alleged value in US dollars now, that person would in fact be making $108 a day. At an hourly rate of $15 an hour, a person would have to work 8 hours to make that. And most of the ranch hands at that time might not have, in fact, worked 8 hours. It's hard to say. They had that large trail that they took from Texas to Chicago, where they drove a large herd of cattle up there. But either way, they were making very good money. And then you compare it to the price tag on something like a Colt, long Colt, 6-shooter revolver, right? Brand new, right? They're brand new at this point. And you go to a general store, of which they didn't have licenses or any of that nonsense. You go to the general store, and you buy this long Colt revolver for $15. Somebody would look at that today and say that's particularly cheap and surprising, and then you'd have somebody come along and say some crap like, oh, their money was worth more. No, it wasn't worth more. Their money wasn't the same as what we have, essentially, because the person would go in and pay for that with 15 silver dollars. And if you take that in the ratio to $36 an ounce for silver now, you would come out to $540, which is roughly speaking the price of a Taurus revolver. Many of the so-called cheaper end revolvers are around $500. That long Colt revolver now, which at that time was brand new and somebody could have bought for $500 of today's money, if you're doing the 1-for-1 variant or ratio, or 1 ounce of silver to $36, then that same pistol now would probably be around $10,000, and that's maybe on the low end, and it's used and old because it's a collectible item. So when we're looking at this stuff, there is such a imbalance when it comes to value and understanding of value that it is virtually impossible to make an accurate comparison from now to then. And one of the biggest reasons is that people at that time actually had a basic understanding of economy, value, and exchange. And even probably most people accounting, that ranch hand would have, without having to look it up, have known the fair price for things. Nowadays, people, spend a lot of money on crap quality, and then they come along and find something that's a real find, a real value, and they want a discount on it. So you have all that stuff going on. People cannot recognize value. They don't understand quality. They have no understanding of the basic economic structure as far as anything organic or any sort of simple systems or concepts. So this imbalance presents a couple problems, but the main issue here, I believe, is that with the way the situation is, it's very difficult to ascertain a solution. And the main reason for that is because rather than looking at a system where you have multiple elements that could be fixed, right? You've got, I don't mean fixed as in fixed pricing. You have multiple elements across the board. There is room to maneuver. If you have an area where you have barter and things like that, and that's, I think, possibly the mostly unrecognized saving grace of things like flea markets or so-called black markets, which are actually penny markets, but they always say that black market means illegal goods, which of course means goods that are done without any type of paperwork done up on it. So I don't really need to get into all that stuff. I've talked about that a bunch of times in different videos. But generally, when you have a variety in a market of exchange rates and exchange mediums, say you can go and exchange an ounce of silver for something of equal value, and nowadays you can't just go sell silver. You can't just go trade it for something. You have to go take it to like a pawnbroker or one of these metal stores who are going to severely undervalue it and give you way less than it's worth, and they're going to say all kinds of stupid stuff and have all kinds of stupid excuses. When you have a system like that, which is done intentionally, there's not really much you can do on its face to fix it, because it's not, you can't actually look, in some cases you look at it like it's broken, in other ways it's not really broken. This is done intentionally. It's designed to do this, but you don't have much room to maneuver when the only base exchange medium, the standard, if you will, because the standard is whatever is in circulation, it's just numbers on a balance sheet. And not anybody can just go up and write up their balance sheet, right? Only these select few institutions, these banks, these people that run them, only they can do it. And when only they can do it, they essentially do have that wide sweeping power, which they are using right now in an economic attack. The ability to set prices has come full swing to show in current standard modern times that price gouging can be done across the board. Certain things, and then they gouge prices intentionally. This is an economic attack. This is treason. This is an act of war. It is designed to destroy. And what they do is they, across the board, they can increase the price of things arbitrarily because they controlled that medium of exchange on the balance sheets. Certain things they don't. And that is what undercuts the excuse that it's inflation. Because there, in fact, is nothing to be printed. You do not need to print money. You simply change numbers from here to there, and that's it. That's all they have to do. It's very easy. The prices that withstand inflation, which through any logical understanding of what the concept behind inflation would do, everything should go up if everything's about printing money. But it's not, right? There's always an equilibrium, a value that's organically supposed to set itself, but that's not going to happen when you have a hand which can do everything arbitrarily and ignores organics. Silver, of course, is one of those. The value of it has essentially not changed, while you have the value of so-called essentials like eggs and butter and things like that, doubling, tripling, even quadrupling. But things like silver stays the same. You also find imported goods which have not raised in price, and that completely undercuts the excuse of tariffs. So they always have these excuses to throw out. No matter what you say, no matter how many, you go out and talk to people in the street, they have no clue, no concept, and they just keep regurgitating crap that they have been told and continue to be told. So there's a lot of issues at work here that have been done intentionally. The people doing this are doing this intentionally. They are price gouging, very specific and across the board, all these markets, and they throw out any excuse they want, but they're doing it on purpose to ensure that they drive people into poverty, that they do all of these things that is in fact economic warfare. And they do it because they have essentially put themselves into the position of a monopoly on not just currency, meaning currency on a balance sheet at this point, but also the standards of weights and measures. And these things are pretty important concepts that not many people know about nowadays. When you set the standard of weights and measures, you also set the currency, then you, essentially speaking, have full control over a monetary system or the economy. But the fact that these elements are leveraging their control in an antagonistic and enemy belligerent manner, that shows you what the motive behind their past actions, that this is the sort of the culmination of the plan. The removal of metals from circulation, the removal of cash, all this stuff, right? A lot of people are like, oh, cashless society is not about, it's about slavery. It's about enslaving the humanity. I would say it's more about destroying humanity, because they set this system and built it up specifically so that they can gouge the price on very essential products that most people consider are essential and have no other options for them. And so those people, and they also have the ability to predict what people can afford and comfortably, not even comfortably, just live within the situation, and they intentionally increase it beyond the means of the regular quote-unquote household. That is economic warfare.